All right, in this video we want to discuss the microbiology associated with the nervous system. So as usual, for each of the organ systems, we'll discuss the basic anatomical structures that we need to be aware of. We'll think about how this organ system is defended against microbial infection. And then we'll end by thinking about what microbes normally inhabit this organ system. So let's get started with the anatomy. So the nervous system is broken into two primary components. We're going to talk about the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. For the central nervous system, we'll see how that's just composed of the brain and the spinal cord. And then the peripheral nervous system is the part of the nervous system that carries signals out to the rest of the body, and that's primarily composed of nerves. For our purposes, we're mostly going to be thinking about the central nervous system. So we'll focus a little more on the anatomy of the central nervous system, and we'll think about infections of the central nervous system. So let's think about that anatomy that is specific to the central nervous system. So here we're looking at an individual's brain, and we're going to think about these anatomical structures associated with that part of the central nervous system. But these structures carry into the spinal cord as well. So the structures we want to be aware of are the things that surround the central nervous system. So the central nervous system is completely surrounded by bone. Now the type of bone, or the exact bone structure, differs depending on the part of the central nervous system. The brain is surrounded by the skull, whereas the spinal cord is surrounded by our vertebrae. But all aspects of our central nervous system are surrounded by bone, and that provides a lot of protection against impact. Our central nervous system is also completely surrounded by these meninges. So there's several layers of tissue. We can see them here, the meninges that separate the outer layers of bone from the inner layers of brain or spinal tissue. And so these are the dura mater, the arachnoid matter, and the pia mater. I think the last main anatomical component of the central nervous system we should be aware of is that the central nervous system is filled with fluid. And that fluid serves a few functions. Primarily, the fluid provides a way for nutrients to diffuse through the central nervous system so that all of these cells can get the nutrients they need. And in addition, that fluid provides sort of a cushioning for the central nervous system. Essentially, the brain and spinal cord are floating in this fluid. So those are really the main anatomical structures we want to be aware of. Again, the peripheral nervous system just has nerves. I think the only other detail we should add then is to think quickly about the synapse and how it works and why it's important for disease. So the synapse is a structure that exists to transmit signals from one neuron to another neuron. So here at the top of this image, we've got a neuron that has a signal that it will pass down to this receptor neuron. So this synapse is the gap between where chemical signals can be passed from one cell to another cell. We don't need to understand the minutia of how a synapse functions, but I want us to be aware that there are synapses throughout the entire nervous system, in both the central nervous system and in the peripheral nervous system. And their function is critically important to nervous system function. And I say that just to point out that some diseases target synapse function. So some diseases release toxins that inhibit the synapse from performing its normal function. Some of these toxins might inhibit signal initiation, so they might stop the presynaptic neuron from releasing neurotransmitters. It might stop the postsynaptic neuron from receiving those neurotransmitters. And that can mean that the neurons cannot send signals. And without appropriate signal sending, our nervous system isn't going to work correctly. Other pathogenic toxins might inhibit signal termination. So once this postsynaptic neuron is being stimulated, because the neurotransmitters are bound to the receptors here, after some amount of time, these neurotransmitters should be removed from the synapse so that they stop stimulating that neuron. If we don't remove those neurotransmitters normally, we can send signals for too long, and that signal will continue when it shouldn't. And that can be really bad for nervous system function. For example, it can cause muscles to contract inappropriately for long periods of time. So again, the synapse is critically important for nervous system function, and the synapse can be a target of some pathogenic toxins. All right, so now that we understand the basic anatomy of the nervous system, let's think about the defenses against infection. So mainly here, we're going to focus on the central nervous system and what we call the blood-brain barrier. So the cells that make up the tissues, the blood vessels around the brain and the spinal cord, allow very, very few molecules to pass through. So these cells are extraordinarily selective, very few things get through, and that means that it's really, really hard for a microorganism to infect the central nervous system because of this strong protective barrier, the blood-brain barrier. So that prohibits most microorganisms from getting in there. That means that central nervous system infections are rarer than infections of other organ systems in the body because of this very strong protective mechanism. That being said, the blood-brain barrier causes some problems we need to be aware about. And that is that if we are trying to treat an infection of the central nervous system, the blood-brain barrier can also make it very difficult to introduce drugs like antibiotics into the central nervous system. So treatment of central nervous system infections can be very difficult because of the blood-brain barrier. All right. So the main defense of the central nervous system is the blood-brain barrier. I wanted to point out one other characteristic of the central nervous system, which really isn't a defense against infection, but rather a defense against loss of function. And I want us to think about why that's important. So often when we talk about the central nervous system, we say that the central nervous system has something called immune privilege. So what is immune privilege? Immune privilege just means that this tissue is able to tolerate the introduction of antigens without triggering inflammation. So foreign substances can show up in this organ system, and we won't get inflammation like we do in almost every other organ system. So why is that? This is because the function of our central nervous system is vital for life, right? Our brain is controlling functions like breathing, okay? And if our brain lost function, which is part of the normal effects of inflammation, we might lose control of some important aspect of our biology that is critical for immediate survival, right? So if you got inflammation in the brain, you could lose control of breathing and you could die. So evolutionarily, we have removed that inflammatory response from our central nervous system so that we don't suffer these ill effects of inflammation in this tissue. And again, we call that immune privilege. So it's a special privilege that this very important organ system has, and other organ systems don't have this privilege, avoiding inflammation. So again, that means, if we think about that, that means that if a pathogen does get into the central nervous system, our immune responses are sort of hindered because we don't want the harm that those responses could create. But that means we have less protection against microorganisms if they gain entry. And that's why the blood-brain barrier is so important. Now, there are some immune cells in the central nervous system, and I just wanted to point those out. So there are these special microglial cells. They're the phagocytes for the central nervous system. They act as antigen-presenting cells so that we can trigger an immune response against pathogens. But again, these cells don't trigger inflammation, and we suppress inflammation in the central nervous system because of this immune privilege. So that macrophage activity is less in the central nervous system as compared to anywhere else in the body. So I think that explains everything we need to know about the defenses of the central nervous system. Very strong blood-brain barrier. We suppress inflammation because we don't want the loss of function that comes along with inflammation. And we have some specialized immune cells, phagocytes specifically, called microglial cells that operate in the central nervous system. So what about the normal biota of the nervous system? What microbes normally inhabit that system, and where do we find them? And so the answer is pretty straightforward. The central nervous system and peripheral nervous system should not have any normal microbes at all. So these systems should be sterile in terms of microbes, and the presence of any microorganism in the central nervous system or within cells of the peripheral nervous system represents an infection. That is inappropriate growth, and so by definition is an infection. But we do know, so over time we will see some diseases where certain viruses actually live in our nervous system in that latent state. So examples might include the herpes virus. Examples might also include the chickenpox virus. And all I would point out about these viruses that infect us and then go dormant in our central nervous system or in our nervous system in general is that these are not normal inhabitants of our microbiome. These are infectious agents. Their presence is an infection and is causing disease. So we don't classify those as normal biota, even though they've sort of gone dormant in those cells. That is still an infection. So that's where we'll end discussing the nervous system. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know, and I look forward to talking to you again very soon.